Welcome to the War Room. It is Wednesday, the 1st of July, the year of our Lord 2020, episode 259 of War Room Pandemic. Here from Capitol Hill, Greg Manns, co-host Jack Posobiec in studio with us. I'm Raheem Kassam, and joining us down the line, Stephen K. Bannon. It's the first of the month, Steve, but it's the first day of a whole new trade deal for the United States. It is the first day that NAFTA is officially dead and USMCA is alive and kicking. Steve Bannon.
Yeah, you know, what's absolutely amazing to me is what the country's been through in the last 6 months. I mean, we were the first on this back in January, but if you think of what our country's been through, I think it's the most intense 6 months in modern American history. It's been just incredible, and I even include 1968 in that. It's just been incredible what's going on. But one of the things that's been lost is what President Trump has done as far as restructuring kind of the global trade to essentially bring back jobs to the United States. Today is the day that kicks off USMCA, and there's total crickets about this. I mean, if you look at the news, we're going to get into it with Jack, you, and Raheem here in a moment, but it's incredible. I mean, the mainstream media, and we try not to be just commenting on the media, but it's really today, I think, jumps out the page that absolutely no real analysis or no commentary at all, no news that today, really the most significant fundamental trade deal in 25 years, and if you put that on top of what Trump did with the Korean deal, and particularly with the China deal, really reorienting our trade relationships back to bring American manufacturing jobs back for American workers, and nothing but crickets. You know, I'm glad we have Jack in the Jack Posobiec in studio today, because when we're talking about Hong Kong, there's actually protests going on now and throughout the day over the Chinese embassy. I know we're going to go. We have a live team there with Jack Maxey and the crew. But Raheem and Jack Posobiec, it just blows me away that something so important as USMCA is really starting off today in its first day with really nothing being talked about it.
Jack Posobiec, it's not on the front page on CNN's website right now. The lead story there, Trump allies desert him over masks. But this is really a sea change moment for the U.S. and its trade relationships around the world, is it not?
Absolutely is. I mean, the USMCA and the restructuring of NAFTA, this has been something that Donald Trump has been campaigning on for long before he was ever president,
Decades.
long before he ever entered the political arena in terms of being himself a declared candidate. He actually spoke out against NAFTA during the initial negotiation period of NAFTA. And you can go back to old newspaper clippings of this, and they say a real estate developer from New York got up and spoke and said he was very much against this thing. And so this has actually been a sea change in terms of how the U.S. is going to be doing business. They're starting to close some of these loopholes that have been going in with Mexico and Canada. Loopholes, by the way, and this is, of course, connected with China, because these are loopholes that China was exploiting, particularly with the steel trade with Canada.
Greg Manns, give us the details, the top lines of USMCA. Since nobody in the establishment media wants to do it, let's just remind people. We were talking about this last year when we launched this show back in October, the impeachment. We went through it all. Just remind people why USMCA is so important.
Well, I think it's important to look at the sectors of the economy where there's going to be a dramatic boost. We've got the auto industry, agriculture, and then also digital commerce is put in there as well.
Steve, when you look at today versus NAFTA, when you look at, I mean, this is what we always talk about on the show, right? This is action, and we have an action-orientated show today. You talked about the protests outside the Chinese embassy. We had protests in New York from young Republicans defending the Teddy Roosevelt statue. This is action, 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 and it's crickets, crickets, crickets as far as the media is concerned on this.
Look, the world's on fire. We're going to get into later. In Hong Kong, the Chinese Communist Party has taken over. What's the first thing they're doing? Arresting these young kids that have been standing up for freedom. You've got moves by the police in the United States out on the Chaz in Seattle. You've got protests in front of the Chinese embassy for really the first time about this COVID virus. It looks like from Chinese Americans and Chinese expatriates. You've got so much going on. And in this, you've got this economic inferno, but you can see kind of the strategic structure and direction of what President Trump was trying to do. And Raheem, I think what's been so brilliant is you brought up this construct the other day of how they're just going to start to pile on Trump every day. You see the first thing on CNN and everything is that, hey, people are banning him about masks. You also have this Reuters story I know you want to get into about how the national security apparatus of the Bush administration, the Republican Party, just like in 2016, is going to abandon him again. So he's taken incoming from every area. But I think if you look at the general direction, things are moving, particularly the underlying substrate. What you have to do to get this economy back on track is actually moving forward. I know now it looks like, at least the media is playing it up, that much of the Republican establishment, and particularly people associated with President Bush, are banning him. I think Politico had a story last night, kind of gleefully, talking about how Liz Cheney is going off on the president every day without anybody beating her up or anybody in the Republican Party saying anything. So I think this construct, Raheem, that you laid out the other day, and I know you were on Laura Ingraham last night talking about it, is a pretty powerful construct for people to think about what's happening here in this campaign.
And it goes back to your point, Steve, that we raised yesterday on the show. We went back and we ran some of the numbers here. 79 days, I believe, now until the first votes are cast. The earliest so far, but some of them, as you rightly mentioned yesterday, are still not sure. It could be even sooner than that. We don't know yet, and that's why you get layer upon layer upon layer of every day. There is a leak, there is a story, there is a quote unquote exclusive. The Reuters front page right now is this big exclusive. Hundreds of George W. Bush administration officials to back Biden. One of these anti-Trump groups has come out, put together a super PAC. And they have Bush era Rhino Republicans, and it's going to be like this every single day. Greg Mans.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to see this constant drip all the way through the election, but President Trump's going to beat it back daily.
Jack, when you see something like this, and you follow information warfare is your thing, and we'll get into Jack Posobiec, man on the street, man being abused, and everything that you got into last week, and the extraordinary images from the park where you were. We're going to have all those up as well. I want to get to this, though, real quick with you, because you see this for exactly what it is. And every single day, it's a chipping away at the credibility of this president, and no mention, no weighing, no balancing of things like USMCA.
I said yesterday on Twitter that Joe Biden is the status quo anti-president. And what does that mean? When Donald Trump ran for president, it was an upsurge in American politics. He didn't just take out the Hillary Clinton machine. He went after the Bush dynasty first and foremost. He went after Jeb Bush. That was the first candidate that he triangulated. He focused on. That is who he went after. And the fact that he took out Jeb in those primaries so quickly is something that I think that a lot of people really overlook. The fact that this is the veritable Bush dynasty, right, from all the way from Prescott forward, and that Trump as one guy essentially has been able to take down. So we know that he's a figure that has not ever been seen as part of that political class. And I think that's really part of his appeal for a lot of Americans, is that he is this outsider. That's why a lot of low propensity voters voted for him in 2016. And then the real question is if they're going to come around. So I don't think those are the types of people that are really going to be looking to see how the Bush clan goes and votes or endorses in 2020.
Steve, there was an extraordinary moment on Tucker Carlson's show. Go ahead.
I got a question. Yeah, Hank, I got a question before we get into that. What you saw that the Twitter thing the other day, I think from Genesis, or this guy that laid out exactly what the Biden administration is going to do. I want you two guys to help me think this through. What is it that Donald Trump represents, and what Donald Trump, we're talking about the first day of USMCA. What is Donald Trump and the Trump movement and what President Trump's trying to do about fundamental change for American workers, for American sovereignty? What is it that someone that's been a lifetime Republican, and particularly in the Bush administration, what would they fundamentally hate about President Trump that they would flip to Biden and kind of this radicalization of the Democratic Party? That's the part I fail to grasp, and I don't think they make an argument besides the fact that they hate Donald Trump personally and he triggers them.
Well, Steve, let me unpack what I meant by status quo anti-presidency for Joe Biden. The status quo ante, so the status quo before, was America in decline, America laying itself down low, bowing its head to these international institutions, towards international trade, towards this globalized economy, that they would be in charge, that America would just be one among many nations, right? And you had Barack Obama, of course, saying that American exceptionalism isn't any different from Greek exceptionalism. That's sort of a symptom of this kind of idea, that America should not be special. American people aren't special. The American worker isn't special. We should and this of course shows up in the economics of the situation. So you've got in our trade deals, we outshore everything to China. Our jobs go over there. Our manufacturing goes over there, China, Southeast Asia, and Trump today, and you rightly put this out, Steve, that he is moving towards America resurgent, America re-strengthening itself, bringing those jobs back, bringing that industrial sector back to the middle America, actually working to restore that American situation that we had going into, say, the 1980s, 1990s, because he's seen the change in his lifetime of America as a strong country, a strong sovereign country, becoming subservient to this international order. And this has been something that the Bushes pushed, the Clintons pushed, the Obamas pushed. It was really both parties in Washington were pushing this thing. And so if you want to go back to that, if you want to go back to that system, if you want to go back to America in decline, which of course goes to serve the rise of China, if you want China to become the world leader, if you want the yuan to be the world reserve currency, that's what you go for when you're choosing Joe Biden.
Raheem, you were saying something about Tucker
Yeah.
and about Laura Ingraham last night. What was your point?
No, look, the point is, and Tucker just had this extraordinary moment last night that represents, it seems like everything we've sort of stumbled upon in this conversation, which is the distinction between the facts, the distinction between action, and the distinction with those things, and what he called partisan junk food. And that's something I think that a lot of people are getting tired of from the right, is just having these regurgitated talking points over and over. And you see that not just with these Bush administration people coming out and giving these same old talking points to try and undermine President Trump, but you saw it from the media when they were, supposedly quizzing Joe Biden yesterday in one of the first times that he's come out of his basement. And the questions, we have some technical glitches here, I think, from Denver, so excuse the background noise. But the distinction between the way that they treat President Trump and Kayleigh McEnany in the White House and the kid gloves that they put on when they handle Joe Biden, there was only one question that stood out yesterday when Joe Biden was asked about, and it was the very last question about cognitive decline. And I think we have the clip here, and I want to play this before we go to a break. If we have it, I think we're going to have to wait on this very, very shortly. We can play the clip now. Okay.
Last question, real quick. Some have speculated,
You're a
sir,
lying dog.
that you are subject to some degree of cognitive decline. I'm 65. I don't have word recollection that I used to have. I forget my train of thought from time to time. You got 12 years on me, sir. Have you been tested for some degree of cognitive decline?
I've been tested and I'm constantly tested. Look, all I got to do is watch me, and I can hardly wait to compare my cognitive capability to the cognitive capability of the man I'm running against. Thank you so much.
Last question, real quick.
Tested,
Some have speculated.
and he's constantly tested. We're going to go to a quick break now. Stephen K. Bannon down the line. Greg Banns.
The very lead there is I'm
Constantly tested. We're constantly testing Joe Biden right up until November. Right here on the War Room. We'll be back in just a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room here on America's Voice.News, later on Newsmax TV, on the John Fredericks Radio Network, and blown through the CCP's firewall in China thanks to G News and GTV. Greg Manns, Jack Posobiec, special guest co-host in studio with me, Raheem Kassam. Over to Stephen K. Bannon.
Yeah, I want to thank also our listeners in Chicago with all the tragedy going on there. FM 99.1, 103.9. Look, whether it's the streets of Chicago, on these brutal weekends, or the streets of Hong Kong today where people are being arrested, or in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., where you're starting to see protests outside the Chinese embassy we'll be going to in a little while. It's turbulent times. In turbulent times, entrepreneurs need to know how to mitigate their risk. The best way to do that is NetSuite by Oracle. Go to netsuite.com/Bannon, Bannon. Get your report today. 7 action steps every entrepreneur should be taking during these turbulent times. Back to you, Raheem.
And speaking of action, every day on this show we try and improve and bring you new and novel things and action-orientated events that are taking place, whether it's USMCA and bringing you the details, nobody else will bring you on that, or this protest that is happening right now outside the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. We're going to see if we can take you live to Jack Maxey, our correspondent on the ground outside the Chinese embassy. Jack, do you hear us?
Yes, I hear you. I'm so excited to be here. We're with this beautiful crowd of people who are promoting freedom here in front of the Chinese embassy. And you'll see these signs. We've had these flags out before. Here we have the new federal state of China, our wonderful friends. We want everybody to know the enemy of planet Earth is the CCP, not the Chinese people. Friends with America, always. We're here to collapse the CCP.
I love
Come
Jack.
on, people, give us a shout out to the world.
I love the enthusiasm. Jack, just explain to us, how many people are we seeing out there? I imagine probably, it looks like a massive crowd out there. And just tell us a little bit more about the crowd. What are the signs they're holding up? What are the flags they're waving? What are the chants going on this morning?
CCP lied, Americans died. This is the theme here, and we're promoting the new federal state of China. We are here arguing for freedom, and every one of these people you see out here is a brave person. When we arrived earlier, there were security personnel everywhere taking photographs of people coming up. So they know that they're marked, but they're willing to stand here. And I want the American people to take courage. Look at our flag flying next to the new Federal Republic of China. This is the future, people. We want everybody to be on board. I'm here, and I could not be more proud to stand with these great patriots. The world is changing, and war room pandemic is a big part of that.
Jack,
so all of you are listening. Feel good about today.
Jack, let's just explain to us a little bit more as well. You said that there were security personnel on behalf of the Chinese embassy out there. I mean, people will need to know that specifically these people who are going out there and protesting against the Chinese Communist Party, they are putting their lives on the line. They are potentially risking their families who may still be in China or in Hong Kong. It takes some bravery to be out there. Just walk us through that slowly and again, because it's so important. This isn't like marching through the streets of Washington, D.C. screaming for communism and anarchy, where you know you're in a safe country, you know you're not going to be abused by the police, you know the government is not going to seek political reprisals against you for protesting. This is something entirely different, is it not, Jack?
Well, we know, Raheem, we've spoken about it many times. The CCP is a giant surveillance state. They've already taken DNA samples from all the males in China, 700 million people. We know that the purpose of this surveillance is so that people who step off the reservation, it allows the state to go after their families. So the courage that these people are portraying out here is something that's kind of hard to define for those of us who have never lived under a police state. And that's what the people of China are living under. This is like the Gestapo with technology on their side. Everybody in the world should decide for these people. They're not just protesting like they would be in front of the White House or any other American or Western organization. They are protesting a murderous regime with all the consequences that could come from portraying that regime in a poor light. Everybody needs to reveal the truth so that the world will understand that this is the Nazi regime of the 21st century. And it's in fact more dangerous because of the surveillance that we talk about, because of the fact that they have TikTok on your child's phone.
Jack,
They know what his thought
we may have to drop we may have to drop this feed from Jack and reconnect with the let's drop the feed. We'll reconnect with Jack, but plenty more questions I have for Jack Maxey in the field. Those are the images live that you're seeing from Washington D.C. outside the Chinese embassy. Remember, it was on this show months ago now where we suggested that this action and pressure on the Chinese Communist Party from both within and without here in the United States and indeed in China itself, as we blow through the firewalls, thanks to G News and GTV, these scenes that wouldn't otherwise be seen in China are going to be seen in China, of ordinary people standing up against the Chinese Communist Party. Steve Bannon, when you see images like that, how does that make you feel?
It's incredible, and see the respect that they have for the United States of America, and you see the American flags down there and the flags of the new federal state of China, and these American citizens and Chinese expatriates down there really protesting, Raheem and Jack, as we talk about all the time, the murderous dictatorship in China. That's the problem with this pandemic. It's the reason we're in an economic inferno. You know, we've had the greatest economic meteor, hit the United States and the rest of the world. That was all because of the CCP, and it's so, I think, great today to see, particularly some of those signs. At least I can see them online. The CCP lied, Americans died. I think it's just absolutely incredible. The only thing I think we got to get producer Vish next time to tell Jack if he wants to be eligible for the Peabody Award that he could still win. I don't know if he should be waving the flag of the protesters. So we gotta get Jack more up to speed. But I think the live reports are great. I can't wait till later in the show to go back to him. But Posobiec, I know we got a lot to talk about the United States and what's happening to Chad, but if you compare what's happening outside the Chinese embassy today in Washington, D.C., with free men and women in a free country, exercising their rights to protest, just like the protesters for Mr. Floyd and his murder, were able to and have the full right to peacefully protest. You compare that, Jack, to what's happened in Hong Kong just in the few hours since the Chinese Communist Party has really cracked down and has now passed this law and is in full crackdown and arrest mode in Hong Kong. You see the difference in the two systems. You see the difference in the freedom-loving alliance of liberty that the United States is at the head of, and you see that, what Jack Maxey said, that really the totalitarian state and really the 21st century Nazis.
Well, Steve, it's interesting that Maxey actually compared them to the Nazi regime, because what this new Hong Kong law has done, we shouldn't even really call it the Hong Kong law, because it's a national law passed by Beijing, imposed upon Hong Kong. This isn't something that the Hong Kong people asked for, and it's not a law in the sense that in Western jurisprudence, we would think of people coming together and negotiating and legislating, right? This is an edict. This is an imposition. This is an order. And one of the main things that it sets up is essentially, and if you look at Article 60 of this thing, it sets up essentially what they call a new Hong Kong police unit called the National Security Unit. That may not be the final name, but it's called the National Security Unit. And what they are is essentially a new Gestapo. And if you look at this thing, and I'll actually read from it, and you can see, so you see the freedom in the United States, the people protesting being able to use their free voices, but those voices are not able to be heard in Hong Kong, because here's what's going on now. It says, the acts performed in the course of duty by the Office of Safeguarding the National Security of the Central People's Republic, in accordance with this law, shall not be subject to this jurisdiction of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Moreover, in the course of performing duty, a holder of an identification document or a document issued by the office, including their vehicles, will not be subject to inspection, search, or detention by law enforcement officers of the region. So it's full Gestapo-like immunity for agents of the PRC, direct agents of the Chinese Communist Party, to then go into Hong Kong and do whatever they want. Now, a little bit of this we had suspected for the last couple of years, because we had seen dissidents being rolled up. We'd seen them being disappeared in the past, and nobody was sure which unit had done it from the Hong Kong police force. No one was really sure who had taken it. We assumed it was Chinese MSS, their security forces. Well, now they're just coming out and they're taking the full mask off, and they are saying these agents are coming in from the mainland. They're going to go after Hong Kong protesters. And by the way, Steve, this law does not only apply to Hong Kong citizens. If you are a foreigner, if you're an expat, of course, Hong Kong is a massive expat community. This law applies to you fully as much as it would to a Hong Kong citizen. So there is no distinction between who you are. And by the way, that doesn't only apply. There's so many wide-ranging things of this to get into all the details. This even applies to things that you may have said on social media. We talk about the surveillance. If you said something on social media, if I said something, if Steve Bannon said something, if Raheem said something here on War Room, they could pull that up and then arrest you in Hong Kong just for something that you said years ago outside the country.
Steve, we've got about a minute left here.
Well, look, I think it compares and contrasts the two systems. Remember, we've been reporting from and broadcasting about Hong Kong since June of last year when the protests first started. And we said in the first couple of weeks, this was going to happen. This is the way the Chinese Communist Party rolls. And with Raheem and Jack, what stunned me is that it's taken 6 months until you have any American citizens outside the Chinese embassy holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable.
Yeah.
You know, we've heard Pompeo, we've heard Navarro, we've heard different voices in the administration. President Trump tweeted last night, it's now time to hold them accountable because they caused this. But I think it's pretty shocking. It took us 6 months to get here.
Steve Bannon, Jack Posobiec, Greg Manns, and more of what the people want in the live chat. More Jack Maxey after this break.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. Raheem Kassam, Jack Posobiec, Greg Manns. Over to Stephen K. Bannon.
Look, every day in this show, we take you from the streets of Hong Kong to the streets of Seattle, Washington, to talk to you about the global turbulence caused by this pandemic, the economic inferno it triggered, the global financial crisis. Entrepreneurs are going to lead us through this. And if you're an entrepreneur, you need NetSuite by Oracle. Oracle is the #1 platform on the cloud. NetSuite's the #1 platform for entrepreneurs. Over 20,000 companies. If you're $1 million in revenue to $100 million in revenue, you need to check out NetSuite by Oracle. Go to netsuite.com/Bannon, Bannon, to get your pamphlet, 7 action steps that entrepreneurs should be taking in these turbulent times. That's netsuiteByOracle.com/Bannon, Bannon. Raheem, back to you and our team out on the in the field in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, let's go back to the field. Jack Maxey outside the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. Jack, firstly, just let's do a reset on this. Let's remind the audience exactly where are you, what is going on, how many, it sounds like you've got a heck of a load of people behind you now. Walk us through it from the top. We may have connection issues down there. We may even have, who knows, connection issues at the interference of the Chinese embassy down there. I mean, I've had things like that happen before.
Especially China-Russia embassies.
I've done it outside, protest outside the Qatari embassy, and they scramble the signal and all that kind of stuff.
Just
Greg
think
Manns.
about how we were testing beforehand. It was coming through crystal clear.
Right, that's exactly right. Steve, while we're waiting to reconnect with these guys, I want to make mention of the fact yesterday on the show we talked about, and the day before in detail and at length, the British government's response. Why is the British government so important on this? The handover in 1997 from the British Empire, as it once was, to the Chinese Communist Empire, as it now is, of Hong Kong. And we saw very little, and we have seen very little action. Lots of words, very little action from the British government on this. But this morning, we have had Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, pledging in Parliament to honour passport promises made to Hong Kongers, saying that there are potentially millions of people who are able to emigrate to the United Kingdom as a result of being passport holders, and there would be no limit, in the words of the British government, to people who can leave Hong Kong under Chinese Communist Party rule. Steve, and then Jack.
Yeah, I think that's very important. Actually, I think it's a pretty bold move to reinforce by Boris Johnson. Look, this was a deal that obviously Margaret Thatcher's government, and at the time I think it was Chris Patton, made with the Chinese Communist Party, but the United States essentially approved it, right, and looked to this Chinese Communist Party to guarantee two countries, or one country, two systems for 50 years. We see that didn't work out. Now they've cracked down fully, but I think it's actually a pretty strong move of the British government to reinforce this about the passports. And it could be quite a few people from Hong Kong. You know, we had a gentleman on the other day, a businessman from Hong Kong, that said he would hope the United States would try to look at 10 or 20,000 essentially students who, because of their arrest records, might not be eligible to come over here for visas, but that the Chinese Communist Party is just rounding these guys up. And as Jack Posobiec just said, they've now got a new Gestapo, a new kind of stability force that's going to go in there and start cracking heads. One of the provisions of this that's so dangerous, Jack and Raheem, is that they got a provision that now they look at this as basically one system. They can take these kids and send them right to these prisons in mainland China with essentially no due process, no legal rights, no legal representation. So I think this is going to cause a big deal throughout the world about taking these citizens and figuring out how to help the people in Hong Kong.
Kel Surprise, Jack Posobiec, no mention of USMCA as we talked about on any of the lead establishment news networks right now. No mention of this protest outside the Chinese embassy in Washington D.C. You can bet your bottom dollar if it was a BLM protest outside the White House, you'd have 50,000 cameras out there. But I want to bring it back to this, what Steve just mentioned, and the pledge from the British government that up to 300,000 BNOs. Passport holders, but no limit on that. And people are actually talking of up to, I think it's 2.83 million people potentially eligible for this. What a big deal this is.
Well, it's a huge deal because not only you have so many British citizens, but then they might be living in Hong Kong, but a lot of the times you'll have expats that go over, they marry someone who's local. They may not have gotten their citizenship through their spouse yet. The kids might have different citizenship, might have dual citizenship at that point. So you get into a lot of these issues. At the same point, you have dissidents now who, as Steve pointed out, and quite frankly, I think this new Gestapo force, I'm actually thinking that my assessment would be this is a revelation of a force that's already been in place probably for a couple of years at this point, because we know that these dissidents have been rolled up, and then suddenly the booksellers, this was going on a few years ago. They were putting out books that were critical of the Beijing government, and then all of a sudden they would disappear and they'd show up in Shenzhen a couple of months later. And so we think that this is a force that's been operating, a unit that's been operating inside Hong Kong for some time now, and now they're just making its existence known to the world, announcing that it's going to be established, but actually they've been conducting operations for some time now. That being said, they're formalizing this organization. They're formalizing what the Hong Kong dissidents, Joshua Wong, who's been a very young guy, very courageous and fearless guy who's been out there, he's formally stepped down. They've actually disbanded the formal organization that was leading the Hong Kong dissent, because that organization has now essentially been declared illegal. They've been declared criminals. They've been declared essentially enemies of the state. So while they do have their freedom of speech in some very limited, actually, no, correct me, they do not have freedom of speech anymore. It's gone. If you speak out against the Beijing government, if you speak out in favor of human rights, if you speak out in favor of Hong Kong's rights, and if you've spoken out against us in the past, they can use that against you. So it's not a law. What it's done is giving them a green light to go and conduct these mass roll-ups, these mass crackdowns under the guise, under the cloak of a formal legal process where, and it's really designed for us in the West to sort of pull our hands back and for these feckless leaders and politicians that we have across the West. And I would at least applaud Boris Johnson for stepping up to the task here, that they're going to say, well, they passed a law and that's what we do, and now everything they're doing is legal, and it's going because they understand our systems better than we do. We set up these systems to codify this international government, international jurisprudence, International Criminal Court, the UN, and so China is using our own system against us by passing edicts and proclamations that are completely illegal and completely fly in the face of everything that we've stood up for in terms of human rights over the past 80 years. And they're doing it right in front of our faces.
Steve,
Raheem,
go ahead.
Raheem, for the audience, I want to make sure the audience understands this, is that it's inextricably linked with your life back here in the United States. If we don't stand up to the Chinese Communist Party in Hong Kong, and that's why I'm saying this is like the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia in 1938. This is really the moment of decision. If we don't stand up, we don't fully sanction these banks, We don't sanction HSBC. We don't sanction the Bank of China. We don't sanction Panay Financial Group and the individuals. If we don't drop the hammer because of what they've done, you're going to see them more emboldened. Remember, we have 125,000 of our citizens dead. We have an economic inferno. The entire Trump great economic record has been blown up because of the Chinese Communist Party. Whether this came out of a weapons lab or not, whether it came out of one of their P4 labs or P3 lab, that's all going to be decided with a further investigation because they haven't given the world any information. What we do know is they had the chain of title on this starting back in December, and they hid it from the world, and they've lied about it. You see outside the Chinese embassy, there's a peaceful protest of American citizens, Chinese expatriates. We can't even hook up with our crew anymore because the Chinese Communist Party, the embassy is knocking it down like they always do. They don't want to lose face. They don't want to have anything throughout the world that shows that people are protesting them in these democratic countries. This is the Chinese Communist Party did this to the United States of America. It did it to the American people. It did it to people throughout the world. That's what we're going to have at the end of this. You're going to have millions dead, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions infected. And it's now time, and I think it's so great it's being led by Chinese Americans and Chinese expatriates in the streets of Washington to actually finally start to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what they've done to the world. And it's time, I think, for the United States government to start to hold accountable even tougher than we've done. There's a couple of measures we've done. We ought to pull all the trade arrangements with them. I think we ought to decouple from the Hong Kong dollar. We ought to put heavy sanctions in, primary and secondary sanctions, and we ought to start sanctioning their economic organizations, their financial institutions, and particularly senior members of the Chinese Communist Party. It's way past time that we drop the hammer on these people. It's just, to me, completely unacceptable of how the Chinese Communist Party has comported themselves.
For the audience watching live, I just want to remind you there is a protest, a large protest outside the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. right now. We are trying to reconnect with our team live there on the ground. You would have seen the scenes in the first part of this hour from Jack Maxey there on the ground. But as we've started to broadcast from outside the Chinese embassy, suddenly it's become impossible, even though we've done a lot of robust testing of the feed from there this morning. So somebody is playing games with that feed, no doubt. And it's Steve, not to put too fine a point on what you just said as well in terms of why this relates to Americans in an election year. Greg Manns, was there a single mention of China, Hong Kong, the Chinese Communist Party, Hunter Biden, anything in the questions that Joe Biden was asked during his staged press event yesterday?
There was not. It was all softball questions and pre.
But I'm looking at the questions here, Greg, and you have Taliban, Russia, Putin, Taliban, Putin, statues. What I mean. How do they get, and does this even count as a press conference?
That press conference was a disservice to the American people, the American voters, as we get closer to the election. Nothing of the real substance came out of it aside from their driving of the Russian narrative.
Well, President Trump making the allegation on Twitter this morning that Joe Biden was in fact even reading his answers from a teleprompter. Jump in, Steve.
Greg Manns. Yeah, Greg Manns is being very charitable. This wasn't softball. This wasn't coach pitch. This was T-ball. I mean, it's a disgrace that they ask these questions, and it's just more on this. Russia is a sideshow. The central issue facing the United States and the American people and people throughout the world is the Chinese Communist Party. They're an existential threat to the American people, and they're an existential threat to mankind. That is the issue. And to have them ask about this raw intelligence that we don't even know if was briefed to the president, about bounties on the Taliban, the Russia. Where's the questions about Pakistan? Where's the question they had something about, and during Obama's administration, about bounties being put on American soldiers by Iran? Okay? This has happened before. The media never jumped on it. This is just, as you said, Raheem, every day they're going to have a pylon on their favorite themes. And I think the American people are going to get a belly full of it. We understand that we're in the middle of the greatest crisis in modern American history because of the Chinese Communist Party. And the media is either too corrupt, too incompetent, or too bought off by the Chinese Communist Party to start asking the hard questions. But Joe Biden's not going to be able to hide. You're not going to smoke him out with just statements. You got to force him out of his cave with his wife. You got to force him out into the open. He's going to have to stand. He's going to have to defend his relationship with the Chinese Communist Party. And he's going to have to defend how the Chinese Communist Party has acted in this pandemic, which is absolutely outrageous. And I couldn't be prouder of American citizens, Chinese Americans, and Chinese expatriates down having their rights, fulfilling their rights of peaceful assembly, to demonstrate in a peaceful manner outside the Chinese embassy.
Steve,
we'll be
right
today.
back with more War Room Pandemic here on Capitol Hill in a moment.
What do you think they're going to do?
War Room
Old school.
Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
From Washington, D.C., we'll go to Washington State in just a moment. You're in the War Room with Greg Manns, Jack Posobiec co-hosting, Jack Maxey out in the field at the Chinese embassy here in D.C. Over to Stephen K. Bannon.
Look, every day we talk about turbulent times, a fourth turning, a world in conflict, a world turned upside down. I think it's now time for you to start to think about precious metals in your portfolio. If you want to get the top people in precious metals to help guide you through this, that's the folks over at Birch Gold. Go to birchgold.com/Bannon, Bannon. They have a 20-page report that you can go through and make an assessment. If you should add gold and precious metals to your portfolio, go along with your real estate, your bonds, your stocks, all of it. The guys at Birch Gold can help you either take possession of metal or just add it to your IRA. birchgold.com/Bannon, Bannon. Get your 20-page report today. Raheem, I got to hear about, I got to leave at the top of the hour here. We're going to get underway, but I want to hear Jack Posobiec tell us about what's going on in Seattle.
Jack, you were there. You went to the Chaz. You were a temporary Chaz resident. You got your visa to cross the border, presumably, and you've studied it. You're following it in detail. We talk about this every day between you and I privately, and the updates that you put out on your Twitter feed and on your packages on OAN are simply must watch. But I want you to explain to this audience, for the people who haven't had the opportunity to pay hyper close attention to every single thing that's going on right now. I was under the impression that this was an autonomous zone. It was going to last forever, and that's just the way it was. Raz Simone was the new Robespierre, and this was the beginning of something completely anti American from the inside out, and it was going to grow, and we were going to see it in more cities. But it looks like the mayor has ended up capitulating to what actually local residents have been putting a lot of pressure on her now for the last couple of weeks. We saw footage we played on this show over the last couple of days of ordinary residents within that area tearing down the barricades themselves, taking it upon themselves to start making entry into the Chaz and removing things that actually built this place up. So explain to us where we are right now. We're going to try and roll some B-roll footage over the top of this. We're actually going to try and take live footage over the top of this from the Chaz right now. Jack Posobiec.
Well, Raheem, we've had, and unfortunately, our worst fears came to fruition when we've had now 5 shootings in the Chaz. 2 teenagers are dead, both African American, and just last night I saw a clip that is so incredibly moving for me as a father, because it was a dad who gave this interview. It was a local interview, and he was in tears. His son, a teenager, had been shot to death in Chaz, and he said, please, he's imploring his government, please shut this down. Please, no more of this, no more bloodshed, no more violence. And he called for, we actually called for the National Guard to come in. And he said, look, this situation has gotten completely out of control. And unfortunately, we had a very irresponsible, not only political class on both sides of the aisle, quite frankly, and an extremely irresponsible media class, where these folks were going, and they weren't infiltrating us. They were going in with their cameras at 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They were leaving their luxury hotels. They would walk around for a little bit during the daytime and say, oh, this seems nice. People are handing out food, and it's a block party atmosphere. And then they'd leave. They'd go back to their hotels. Well, I was there at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., black mask, black hats, got the hood on, looking like everybody else, and I'm just using my phone to record. so they don't necessarily think that I'm in media. And I saw the anarchy, I saw the lawlessness, I saw the mob violence, the mob justice that was going on. When you have a situation where anarchists take over an area and then the mayor or the government allows it to happen, then you understand that there's no laws in that place. So what happens? Criminals and outlaws will use that space to exploit it and to settle old scores, to go after one another. And, usually when people know that there's police potentially involved, that you take things up to a line and make it an argument with somebody, but, it's got to end at a certain point. That didn't happen here.
So we're seeing the pictures. We've got the pictures up on the screens right now as well. Just explain to us a little bit about what has actually occurred in terms of the police. So the police tried to take back the police station there, I think last week, was it? I mean, the days go so quickly now. But we saw the images of them retaking, quite peacefully, without major incident, taking the police station. But it appears now, and you're seeing the footage on your screens, they're taking the whole streets back.
Well, what they did was they put forward a series of escalating proclamations and edicts in the area over the course of about a week or so. So first they said the park is going to be closed. There's a huge park right across the street from this police station. Then they said, okay, we're going to move the barricades out. So a lot of those barricades that you saw on the road there, the concrete barricades, those were not erected by the protesters. This is key. Those were erected by the city of Seattle at the order of Mayor Jenny Durkan. She supported this thing wholly right up until the minute where it became completely unsustainable because the bodies started stacking up. We also saw then they started closing in the barricades. They started removing some of them. It was closing, and I mentioned this last week on War Room, where now Chad's had shrunk down to only 3 blocks. Then it was only 1 block. Then it was just the tent city right around that police precinct, the East Police Precinct, where the violence began about a month ago now. And then Jenny Durkan said, well, instead of continuing to hold on to that precinct, we're going to abandon the police force and abandon essentially the residents and business owners of that area, of which there are many. So this morning around 5 a.m., after several days throughout the week of escalating force, they did send in the police at 5 in the morning in full riot gear, with their bicycles, with you can see the truncheons and night. Those are the full, actually larger than nightsticks. And they said, move back, move back, move back. They put out the announcement. They said, this area has been declared off limits. The park is closed. These streets are closed. Everyone has to move out.
We want to get more into this, and we'll get more into it in the second hour here. Steve, we've got about 30 seconds left. Over to you.
Burgess Owens and Mara Monahan joined Jack Posobiec, Raheem Kassam, and Jack Maxey. Jack Maxey's on the streets of Washington, D.C. with the new federal state of China as they protest the Chinese embassy. It's a great day, guys. Have the next hours on fire. We're going to get underway here in the off the coast of New England.
And in the next hour, we'll talk to you about the protests that happened to us, that happened to Jack Posobiec last week, that happened to Meade last night, downtown in Washington, D.C. We'll get into all of that. Gavin Wax defending the statues in New York. An action-packed hour in the next hour. War Room Pandemic. Don't miss it.